Okay. Okay.
It's all high definition and I didn't spell it.
No, I can't see up there. I need to get my eyes checked.
This is actually pretty good. Spending most of my life squinting at things in the distance. It's kind of nice to not.
Oh yeah,
now
that's
it's all a
blur. So I see now.
Maybe -40 for the wind chill.
Our applicants are also so. Yeah, they're already logged in. So
I'm not there, I can't see him.
Cool. We have one here. There might be something on. It's got lines for 2 applications.
There you go.
Morning, everybody.
Good morning, sir.
I think we're ready. Yeah, sure. Good morning. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Before we start, if anybody would like to speak, please make sure you have signed up on that. Okay. I'd like to have the council commission members introduce themselves. And George, would you want to start off?
Yes, good morning. My name is George Lee.
Good morning. It's Butch Tracy.
I'm Don Michaelman.
Ted Gambogi.
Morning, Tom Hutchison.
Greg Lozelle. Good morning, Stan Goligoski.
We'll have the members of the staff introduce themselves when they come to speak. I'd like to recognize our council member Cisco here and feel good on that.
Good morning.
It's always good to make an entrance. And council member Rusing too. I hereby call to order the March 11th, 2021 public hearing of the City of Prescott Planning Commission. This is an open meeting, public meeting, and it's being tape recorded and videotaped by the city. The proceedings are being televised by representatives of the public media. The public, local cable and or radio stations may also rebroadcast. The number of commission members present is 7. They will require 4 votes for majority. As some individuals may be attending this meeting remotely, All parties wishing to be heard, including commission members, are required to state their name prior to speaking in order to ensure accurate minutes. Members of the public when called upon are required to state their name and address for the record so we may know who is speaking and be able to contact them at a later date if necessary. Please check your cell phones and be sure they're on mute or off on that. First item on the agenda is the minutes of the February 22nd, 25th, 2021. Are there any corrections? If no correction, is there a motion concerning the minutes?
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the minutes as written.
We have a motion to approve the minutes. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right, we have a motion and second. Any further discussion? If not, why don't we go ahead and call the roll on this since we have people from the public zooming in on this, if you don't mind, Kate.
Butch Tracy?
Yes.
George Lee?
Yes.
Greg Lizelle?
Yes.
Thomas Hutchison?
Yes.
Stan Galagowski?
Yes.
Ted Gambogi?
Yes.
Don Michaelman?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
The first item on the agenda is CSP 21-001, proposed comprehensive sign plan for Calvary Prescott Chapel, 2313 East State Route 69. Property owner, Calvary Chapel of Prescott. Applicant is Lance Pelton of Core Displays. I hope I pronounced the name correctly there. APN 112-05-024H. And Tammy, I believe you have this.
Yeah. Prescott. This is a proposed comprehensive sign plan for the Prescott Calvary Chapel. Here's the show of the imagery map. Good start this morning. We have here State Route 69, and we have the Lowe's store here. Here's where the church location is, and then here's the Home Depot. Just kind of the U-Haul store is over here. This is zoned business regional, which allows for the church. Along this corridor, this is a commercial corridor within the city of Prescott, which is an overlay district. Within the commercial corridor, there is some requirements that all sign lighting to be turned off 1 hour after closing of business or by 10 p.m., whichever is greater. So that's something we have addressed in the stipulations in this application. So here's the proposed sign so the existing sign is 78 square feet. So there is no change to that. Per our sign code on this corridor, they would be allowed a 48 square foot monument sign, but this is a legal non-conforming sign. So they're not making it bigger than what it already is. But per our sign code, only 50% of the sign can be a changeable copy. So they are proposing it to be 40 feet. So this area right here is the area that's going to change the copy. And then that's 40 square feet. So the need for the comprehensive sign plan. Here's a picture of the existing sign. This is going towards Prescott Valley, towards the mall. Like I said, there's no change in the size of the sign. This is looking the other direction. So it is visible from both directions. So the stipulations that staff is recommending, the applicant is also asking for a change in the message rotation allowance. Per our sign code, it is every 30 seconds. We did talk with ADOT because this was in the ADOT corridor. It is regulated by ADOT. They allow for up to 8 seconds, and they didn't have any concerns with the proposed sign as it was sent to them. So what we're recommending is the 10 seconds, which is something the applicant, which gives enough time for it to rotate for people to possibly see it as they're driving through this corridor. And also the sign to be turned off 1 hour after closing of business or by 10 p.m., whichever is later. So that meets the business corridor conditions. So that concludes my presentation. I'm free to answer any questions. The applicant from the sign company is on the Zoom, and the Reverend is here from the church too.
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Just a
Tammy, did the applicant agree to the 10 seconds?
That was in their request, either 5 to 10 seconds. So we went higher up.
I remember it was 5 to 10, but and we picked 10, so they agree with that.
As far as I know, yes.
other questions? Tammy, have any other churches request a change in the 30-second thing? Because I think we've had several churches that have put up electronic signs.
From what we would call, they may have requested it, but they weren't granted. But this one's also on a highway, so that the traffic is going a little bit more faster through here. Usually all the other churches were in town. So usually the speed limit was 35. I believe it's 45 through here. Whoever does 45 through here, but it's 45 posted.
Suggestion only.
Yeah. So this will give it, the 10 seconds will allow enough time for people to see it to change. It can only be used by the church for church events. It cannot be used for outside vendors, and that's an ADOT requirement.
Okay. Any further questions for Tammy? Any questions for the applicant? I happen to have one question for the applicant. You said the minister is here?
Yes.
If you don't mind, son.
No, not at all.
And could you have name and address, please?
Yeah, my name is Raj Ahuja. I'm the senior pastor at Calvary.
Thank you for coming, sir. The question I had in the introductory thing that we have in here, there was one of the comments made was one of the reasons that you would like to have the sign of the size of the message board is that wouldn't need to have banners anymore.
Yes.
Are you planning not to have banners in the future then?
Yes, this would eliminate the need for banners. Absolutely.
Thank you, sir. That was the only question I had. I was just kind of curious on that.
That was very easy. Yes, this would be one of those things that would take care of needs because we have events throughout the year, different events, Christmas, Easter, food drives, and so on. And we'll often purchase and then apply banners to trailers in the parking lot or something, but this takes care of that issue.
Okay, thank you, sir. Anybody else have a question? Thank you again. Does anyone want to make a motion concerning this?
We may have, I think we have someone on the phone.
Yeah, sorry about that. Anybody from the public would like to make a comment in the audience? Is there anybody on Zoom that would like to make a comment?
I do have a Sharon Garrison. Let me make sure that, and for the people on Zoom, if you are going to talk about an item, please refrain from raising your hand until that application is heard so we don't get them confused. But Sharon, would you like to comment on this?
Actually, I need to change it over to a later agenda item.
Okay.
I didn't realize I signed in too early.
Okay, thank you. That's why I wanted to make sure. So no, we don't have it.
So no one else on Zoom wants to make a comment on this?
Correct.
Okay. We are open for a motion.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I'd like to move to recommend approval of CSP 21-001, comprehensive sign plan for the Calvary Chapel with the following stipulations. The message rotation is allowed to change every 10 seconds and the sign to be turned off 1 hour after closing business or by 10 p.m., whichever is later.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'd second it. Butch Tracy.
Motion and seconded. Any further discussion? If not, Kaylee, would you call?
Yes, and I just wanted to remind all commissioners, please state your name when you're motioning because we will watch the minutes. When I go over the minutes, it really helps me. So, Butch Tracy.
Butch seconded it and Greg Lozelle made the motion.
George Lee.
Yes.
Greg Lozelle.
Yes.
Tom Hutchison.
Yes.
Stan Galagowski,
Yes.
Ed Gambogi,
Yes.
Don Michaelman.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
The next item on the agenda is proposed annexation ANX 20-003, rezoning REZ 20-001, and general plan amendment GNP 21-001 for Prescott Regional Wellness Center consisting of 20 acres and located east of Willow Creek Road, slightly north of the intersection of Willow Creek Road and Whispering Rock Road, parcel number 106-02-009K. Owner is Dr. Ascari, Dora, D-O-Y-E-R Inc. County rezoning is R1L-35 residential. Tammy again?
Thank you, Chairman, members of the Commission. Tammy Duet, Community Finance. The subject property is located off of Willow Creek Road, which we have here. Sorry, wrong screen. Willow Creek Road here, and we have, this is Pioneer Parkway. Down here we have the previous annexation that we did for the Whispering Rock with the proposed Banner Hospital. So this is 20 acres. It's going to be an expansion of that medical complex. There is still a piece of property right here that is under a different ownership that is still going to be in the county. The current zoning of the property is R1L-35 in the county. That's residential, single family, cycle homes only, minimum lots, 35,000 square foot residences, lots. So part of this request is we need to rezone it to the current, consistent with the city planning, which would be the R135. So as we annex it, we have to rezone it to a zoning that's consistent with the city. So the first part will be the annexation with changing this to the R135. Another portion of this request is a minor general plan amendment in our 2015 general plan. This does have the property split with commercial employment and very low density residential. So this part of this request is a minor general plan amendment to expand this commercial employment to for the whole 20 acres. And that's similar that we had to do on the southern annexation too. So this is being consistent in that corridor of changing that classification in our general plan.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. Tammy, below the proposed annexation, there's 5, 6, 7, 8 lots there. Have those been annexed?
Yes.
Or, okay.
Those were part of the Whispering Rock annexation where Banner Hospital is going.
Okay.
That's that location. So then the last portion of this is to rezone it to business general, which would be consistent with this corridor. This actually was rezoned to business regional last year so that they could apply for SUP for the height allowance for the Banner Hospital. So that was done under the business regional, but this will be business general, which is consistent and allow for all the proposed uses that they're planning on going on this property. In a future date, we'll probably see a plat map similar to what we saw down with Whispering Rock. That'll show the access and the circulation and how it's going to be split up, but we don't have that at this time. This is just to annex it and rezone it. Here's the map of the annexation. This shows the boundary of the 20 acres, which is required as part of an annexation. And this is the rezoned site plan. So the current zoning is R1L35 under the county. They are asking to rezone it to be a business regional. So there are 3 actions we need to take as part of this request. The first one is to recommend annexation with initial county equivalent zoning to the single family 35, the SF 35. Then the second motion would be to move to recommend the minor general plan amendment, changing the designation of the parcel. So the whole parcel would be commercial employment. And then the third motion would be to recommend approval of rezoning from single family SF 35 to business general. And that concludes my presentation. I'm free to answer any questions. We do have a representative for Dr. Ascari here, and we also have the engineer on the Zoom.
Thank you, Tammy. Anybody have questions of staff?
I have some. Yeah, Tom Hutchison here. I was doing real well with this until I read this part that said a limited number of residential units for nurses, doctors, and other staff. So how many lots are we talking about? I mean, how many houses?
We'll know that later when it comes through for the plan. So this is just to rezone it to be consistent in that corridor with the southern portion. And then later on, we'll see a plat map come through to plat how that's all going to look. And then we'll know at that time how many residences and everything.
So are we approving?
You're not
approving today?
Just the rezoning.
Just the rezoning?
Yes.
To commercial?
Yes.
Thank you.
Which will allow the residential uses. The residential is allowed in that.
Great.
Yeah, there's more of a query is, you know, if you go further north there, you've got an annexation of Deep Well that the city's already done. And to the east, we've annexed, you know, along 69. This is a county island. Are we just going to piecemeal this as we go along, or is there a way to just get it all done at once?
This other parcel here and the rest of this is under different ownership. They have not come to us with any plans at this time. So their zoning still remains the R1L35 for whatever they want to do, if they want to do it in the county. It is kind of piecemeal as they're buying the property coming in. So
okay.
George?
Chairman, just an additional comment on that. The city's policy has generally been not to go out and proactively annex, but to await property owners to request an annexation. That way we're not imposing the annexation on someone who may not want it. So we usually wait for the property owner to request it. We often encourage multiple property owners to get the other and annex them together.
Thank you. Other questions?
I've got one.
Stan, go ahead.
Yeah, Stan Galagowski. Can you go, I think, advance the slide at this point? One. Yeah. So if you look on, so the trench that's dug there, yeah. And then the actual parcel, has that actually been cleared and leveled if we were to look at it today?
no, you'll see right up that's been cleared up to this property line right here.
Okay.
And then this is right adjacent to that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions for Tammy? I have one. Now, access, we won't know that until we actually see the plot plan when it comes back for development and so forth. Is there any concern about having access out to the creek? Because we're going to have property below that having access and so forth, and there may or may not be a traffic light there. And we have this one, then we have the property above has sort of a peninsula heading out there. How are we going to coordinate? And you got a road that traffic kind of scoots down at times. How many access do we want on that?
We have Scott Lyon on the Zoom, and he can answer that question. You can just go. Unmute yourself, Scott.
Thank you, Scott Lyon, Lyon Engineering. The traffic impact analysis was completed for the proposed rezone and development. The concept was to use access through the Whispering Rock subdivision and use the existing light down at Haas Boulevard. So on the Whispering Rock Road, create a four-way intersection internal to the Whispering Rock development on Wellness Road. Create a four-way intersection there for access into the parcel, and thus having access to the Haas Boulevard traffic signal, and avoid having another intersection, so to speak, or possible traffic signal. Just due to spacing requirements and other things, it wouldn't be likely to get meet spacing requirements for left turn movements in either direction.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Tammy? Anybody from the audience here have any questions or want to discuss this item? Anybody on Zoom?
I'm not seeing anybody.
Okay. Appears that all comments been made. Do I hear, is there a motion concerning this? And also we got to take each one of these separately and vote on them separately, I believe.
Yes.
Okay. Is there a motion to be made concerning these items?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion.
Okay.
Tammy, could you expand that slide so I can read it?
Yeah, wait, I'm not sure. Oh, wait, actually, I'm sorry. We do have somebody on the Zoom that would like to speak. Sorry about that. Patrick? Patrick, would you like to speak on this item? You may have to unmute yourself. Oh, he doesn't have audio. Okay, so. Okay. No, he's not. So he doesn't have the audio, so he can't speak. So never mind, sorry. Here you go.
I move to recommend annexation ANX 20-003 with initial county equivalent zoning to be single family 35 SF 35.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
And that's we motion second. Any further discussion? If not, Kaylee?
Butch Tracy?
Yes.
George Lee?
Yes.
Greg Lozelle?
Yes.
Thomas Hutchison?
Yes.
Stan Galagowski?
Yes.
Ted Gambogi?
Yes.
Don Michaelman?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Is there a motion concerning recommended action number 2?
Mr. Chair, Greg Lozelle. Move to recommend minor general plan amendment GNP 21-001, changing the designation of the parcel to commercial/employment.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it. George Lee.
We have a motion, seconded. Any further discussion? If not, we'll vote. Kaylee?
Okay. Butch Tracy?
Yes.
George Lee?
Yes.
Greg Lozelle?
Yes.
Thomas Hutchison?
Yes.
Stan Galagowski?
Yes.
Ted Gambogi?
Yes.
Don Michaelman?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Is there a motion on recommended action item number 3?
Mr. Chair, I move to recommend approval of rezoning REZ 20-001 from single family SF 35 to business general.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Tom Hutchison, I'll second.
We have a motion and second. Any further discussion? If not, Kaylee?
Tracy?
Yes.
Lee?
Yes.
Lozelle?
Yes.
Hutchison?
Yes.
Galagowski?
Yes.
Gambogi?
Yes.
Michaelman?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay. We now move on to item 4 here. PLN 20-004, preliminary plat for Westwood subdivision, phases 6 and 7, Deep Well Ranch 1.48, located west of Willow Creek Road and north of the Westwood subdivision, site zoning, special plan, community, SPC. Property owner is Dorn Homes, applicant is Lyon Engineering, Scott Lyon. APN 102-19-001D 102-04-01T and 102-19-001C. I feel like I'm a football quarterback.
As long as you don't end that with height. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a request for a preliminary plat to add an additional phase onto the Westwood developments. You've seen plats for the previous 5 phases already before you. This request adds property. See if I can get the mouse to show up. It does. So just north of the existing subdivision, this is the northernmost entrance into the subdivision. This is either recently opened or about to open. It's open now. This area is the proposed location of the new phases, and this area is part of the new phases. So I believe this is 6 and this is 7. Just for clarity, as we go a little further along, I think it's important to understand before we get into the actual proposal this time, how access into the Westwood subdivisions occurs. There are 3 street connections into Westwood. 2 of them are in place. 1 of them is under construction, will be in place soon. That will give access from 3 different points into the subdivision, more than meeting our minimum requirements under both the city's general engineering standards and our agreement with Deepwell Ranch as part of their Deepwell Ranch master plan, which included a lot of connectivity issues and street design issues as part of it. The actual layout of the subdivision is really a series of loops and cul-de-sacs. They connect at 2 points to the existing subdivision boundary to the south of this one. That will provide a few lots in phase 6 that will have access via a cul-de-sac. And then above that, a series of more lots for a total of 108 that will have access through 2 streets that link to the existing subdivision. And then those streets ultimately end up as a series of cul-de-sacs to provide connectivity. One thing to consider, and it's an issue that we asked about initially, due to topography differences and ADOT's restrictions on street connectivity, this phase will not have a direct connection to State Route 89 north of the Mill Creek Road 89 roundabout. So this connection is only through the existing subdivision. Again, it's 108 lots proposed. It falls into alignment with all of our general planning requirements and engineering standards for street design and connectivity. So at this point, it really meets most of the city requirements that would need to be met at a preliminary plat level. Additional requirements have to be met before they do a final plat later after this process. Because it's within Deepwell Ranch, it is subject to the master plan that was approved. This body was deeply involved in producing that master plan. One of the requirements is they must pick a land use group, which for some reason they affectionately pronounce as LUG. Land use group 5B is actually a village land use. I do have the text from that. It's basically a single family residential type of use, which is exactly what they're proposing. It allows for variable sized lots. The lots proposed in this plat phase or phases comply with and match up with the lot sizes in the previous phases that have already been approved. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions from you. What we're requesting today is recommendation in favor of regarding this plat.
Okay, thank you, George. Questions for George?
Right, Mr. Chair, not necessarily a question, just a clarification for anybody that's listening to us. George, this is consistent with the, I know you kind of touched on it, consistent with the original annexation and the master plan that the city council approved a number of years ago.
That is correct. It is consistent with the master plan requirements and with the underlying zoning that allows the master plan.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
I think my question was answered.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions of George? Got a couple quick ones, George. Certainly. The axis there on the red circle to the right, the fact that it's real close to that curve, does that cause any challenges?
It's limited access, so
right
there's
in,
no
right
left
out
of that location. It's a right in, right out only to begin with. You go down to the next 2 access points within the subdivision, both of those allow full turning lanes.
Okay. My concern is someone coming south into town comes around that curve and you have someone slowing down to turn in. So I imagine our street departments looked at this engineering
We have thoroughly looked at it. Presuming people are driving relatively close to the posted speed, it should be,
don't you wish?
should be very safe at that point. There's a flare that allows the car to get out of the main traffic flow as it makes the turn.
Okay. On the northeast part, we have a cul-de-sac. How long is that drive there?
The way we measure cul-de-sacs, we would measure it at the point where the other street is connected to it. And Scott Lyon is on, I know, also representing this one. I believe it's about 350 feet from the point where the road connects to the cul-de-sac itself.
Is there any challenge with the length of that cul-de-sac? Are the homes going to be required to be sprinkled?
They probably will for other reasons, but based on the road alignment itself, no.
Okay. Does anybody from the public would like to make a comment concerning this? Anybody on Zoom?
Don't think so. Let me just see who's got their hand up.
Jenny Ingram, are you, if you are not speaking on this item, please lower your hand. Jenny, would you like to speak on this item? You have to unmute yourself. Jenny Ingram. Nope.
So the answer, sir, is no. Sometimes technology speeds things up, and sometimes it slows things down.
Since there are no other persons on Zoom on this, is there a motion concerning this recommended action item?
Chairman, Commissioner Lee, I move to recommend approval of PLN 21-004, the preliminary plat for Westwood subdivision phases 6 and 7.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
It's Tracy. I'll second it.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Haley?
Tracy?
Yes.
Lee?
Yes.
Lizelle?
Yes.
Hutchison?
Yes.
Galagowski?
Yes.
Gambogi?
Yes.
Michael Mann.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
At this time, I was originally thinking we may want to take a break, but we're going so fast. Do we want to just go ahead? I think we'll have a motion for a break. 15 minutes and we'll be back at, we'll start again at say 10 till.
On George.
You guys are in here.
We're 9/11.
Rare to get an eye on it. No, no, no.
And I lived on really big down, but it's just where are we going? Who are we gonna go? You know, tell me.
I try to explain that line is all the that's what they 5G. Well, she called it 5G.
Yeah.
Going on. I'm trying to explain. What's that? Okay. I've got my, I guess. 1996. Not quite a novel. Yeah, I'm gonna go. Well, I
there's a lot of urban legends today.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, full of it. We always have to say, if you're out, we were asked, you still have to watch for all the robberies because we knew inevitably that's where they're going to go. And so we had bears for life, so you can eat a lot of bear. And it's the same. They were all tough. Just all they do is toss it around on sacks like they were like that. And grab whatever. They're the funniest thing. Over. Yeah, our point man. We all take it.
Snowing, so I was getting ready to leave my house.
I was watching his other cars come in.
Yeah.
I know, that's like a yeah, right?
Unless they get a boost.
When I came back from
there's like a generation.
Ran my first marathon in '84.
That's what I have to tell Tony.
I was in the spring a couple years ago. Then I heard about triathlon.
Oh, my
kids don't know.
She's like, so what time is it?
I thought I knew that.
What's your mom paying for? I told the first applicant, it took me 30 minutes to search for it.
Yeah, the scatter dives. There's an organ. One axis got velocity, the other axis got velocity. And there were two blocks of points that indicated people's big white space. The other block said
You're brave.
Because the reasonable, so that's reasonable. So this is us getting in front of that, so it becomes true.
But you learn, you
This is the legislation for small cells.
Yeah, it's a physiological adjustment.
And have they defined what's called French focus? And is it allowed? So we can't get in under the town.
Like down in Tempe, 4 days. If you had one on every.
It's stalling. I haven't did
When you're young, and then it gets hardwired in there. That's why a fat guy can come out of the corner. We've heard
so you know, if you've got, let's say Dante.
There's a lot of things that
everybody proves yourself at the same time to take selfies.
Oh my gosh, that was all. Oh my gosh, oh my gosh. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're calling me this one. He's like, you're in trouble.
It's too late.
Yeah.
Have we
No, but we have
oh yeah, yeah.
just checking.
Yeah, there's stuff. It's pretty fun. 5 days ago.
And the nearest town is the one that is directly to Indian Hill, which is right on the right there at the water town.
They didn't argue with this. No, Jack George.
But it's got a straight line of sight to where we were lunch. We had 5.
Oh, the kids.
They're good.
Trinity's got this.
She's college.
You didn't have to say. Yeah. So wait, I know the answer.
that's why I just like ended. Yeah, weird. I know that's something new.
Yeah, because it's.
Yeah. I know, I don't know why it has that. My computer doesn't do that like that. I don't know how they have it set up exactly. That's why I was so confused. I was like putting the mouse on this screen. I was like, oh wait, I can't see it there.
Yeah.
No. No. Yeah.
Like when they had everyone underneath the fire.
I don't think it really matters.
Make sure you're planning the clock. Make sure you bring the stuff. Make sure you like
Well, it looks like we have everybody back here, so we're maybe a minute early, but why don't we go ahead and resume this. Before we start, I'd like to go over our procedure that we normally have, our items in front of the commission here. The staff usually makes a report. Commission members will ask questions. We open it up to the public. And when we open up to the public, if you raise your hand, if you'd like to be recognized and come up and speak, I'll go ahead and recognize you. I just don't want to crowd up near the podium at that time. And then we go to Zoom. We try to keep comments from the public to 3 minutes as well as possible on this. And what we're going to do starting off is Tammy is going to make a presentation. George wants to make a presentation. Then we like to open it up to the commission to ask questions after they have made their full presentations on that. So, and when you come up to speak, either in person or on Zoom, if you could state what subdivision that you live in, that could be helpful for us too on that part. Are there any questions? If not, our next agenda item is LDC 21-00, amendment to the Land Development Code, Article 2, Section 2.4.49, telecommunications facilities, to create development criteria to permit these facilities with an allowance for height exceed the zoning district height in commercial and industrial zoning districts, require concealment and screen equipment compounds. So Tammy, you're going to lead off?
Yes, thank you, Chairman, members of the commission. Tammy DeWitt, community planner. Okay, so for background, so as we said before, no changes have been done to the Land Development Code in regards to wireless facilities since it was the wireless Land Development Code was adopted and implemented in 2003. There has been lots of changes in federal laws and state laws. And so we're trying to bring our code kind of up to speed with current regulations. This was discussed at the study session with the City Council on October 27th, 2020, where we were originally given direction to bring something forward. This was discussed as a discussion item at the January 28th and at the February 25th Planning and Zoning Commission meetings, which we brought forward different proposals and we discussed it and we've kind of narrowed it down to what's before you today. So the current process for processing wireless facilities, if they exceed the height allowance of the underlying zoning district, is they have to go through a special use permit. So there's been some questions about us taking out notification requirements and such for a special use permit. That's under a different section of the code. The wireless section of the code, the telecommunications, has nothing to do with the special use permit process. That is not being touched or adjusted. So as part of that special use permit criteria that we look at with those applications, there is a section under the special use permit, section 9.9.5, in which these are the things that we look at with a special use permit. We look at the effect on the environment, compatibility with surrounding area, external impacts minimized, or is infrastructure impacts minimized? Is it consistent with the general plan and code? Is it the parcel size big enough to facilitate what's being proposed? And we have a site plan. So this is kind of redundant and also in the telecommunications. And that's why we were taking it out of the telecommunications, because it's already addressed under the special use permit process. But the special use permit process is not being changed or adjusted because that's also used for other types of applications. Like I mentioned before, it was used with the hospital, for Banner Hospital, for the height that they asked for, the additional height. It's also used for like libraries and museums and stuff in any zoning district. So the SUP process is not just for telecommunications, it's also used for other types of uses in certain zoning districts. And that's not being touched or part of this discussion. So what we're trying to do is update the current ordinance to try to mitigate, take out some redundancy that's in it. There's some things in it that from 2003 that we really can't ask for, it's hard to get from people. So it would take out outdated language and requirements. It adds new definitions from the FCC regulations in regards to the modifications that are allowed. Updates criteria to allow towers to exceed height allowance of a zoning district just in the commercial and industrial. This is not changing the height allowance in residential, multifamily, or light commercial. And it adds criteria to require concealed telecommunications facilities in all zoning districts, which we don't have right now. We recommend, we promote, but it doesn't require it. And we do have things coming through the legislature in regards to small cell wireless on private property through the state. And so this is that's something that we can still regulate even under the small cell criteria in state statutes. We can still regulate height, whether it's concealed or not. So this is still get us ahead of that if it comes forward or it gets approved, where we can still regulate height and whether it's concealed. So in regards to the proposed height allowance, this is discussed at the last meeting. So in the single family residential, multifamily, the SPC, the MU, which is mixed use, neighborhood oriented business. In all those zoning districts, the height allowance is 35 feet, and that's not changing. So if a cell tower or any facility comes through and they want to exceed that height allowance in these zoning districts, it will have to go through the SUP process. In the residential office, if it exceeds the 25 feet of height allowed, it would have to go through the SUP. And in downtown business, if it exceeds the 50 feet, because it would be an other use, then it would be through the SUP process. So in these zoning districts, they have to meet the height allowance or go through the SUP. So that's consistent with what the code says now. So in the commercial, business general, and business regional, except in these zoning districts, it would have to be concealed, which we don't have in our code now. We just recommend it. So that's something we are adding that has to be concealed. So for business general and business regional, which both allow for a 50-foot height, we are suggesting the 70 feet to try to give an incentive for them to go into commercial rather than residential, and mostly with the small cell sites starting to come through. These would have to be concealed, and then if they exceed the 70 feet or greater, they'd have to go through the SUP process, through the public hearing process. And then for industrial, we talked about it at the last meeting. This will be concealed. They have to be concealed, and we were suggesting up to 80 feet. Usually the industrial areas and really low areas of the city, so the 80 feet may give them enough height allowance over the 40 and 50 feet allowed to maybe give them incentives to go in those areas to try to do some infill. So the SUP process, so basically if they're going to exceed the allowed height allowance, they would have to go through the SUP process. Now with what we're adding in this language, with its special use permit request, the applicant shall submit technical information or other justifications as are necessary to document the need for the additional height to the satisfaction of the city council, since the city council has the final approval. This is where it gives us a chance to ask for the more information in the RF. We do ask them now, so it helps their applications to show the need, but this is actually requiring it because it says shall. So this gives us a little bit more teeth of what we can ask when they're actually initially submitted, because once they submit anything to us, the shot clock starts. So then our time frame starts. So unless they request any deferrals. So this gives us a little bit more teeth than what we have now with these applications, but it does not change the process. For the special use permit, it still has to go through the public hearing process with all the required notifications.
Mr. Chair, I have a point question on that.
Do you want to wait?
Just on one of the words up there, so it's all right. Staying Allegoski. So I know, Tim, you did state that you said shall is a word that they have to do, but in fact, isn't shall a term that doesn't mean they must do? Correct?
No, shall means shall, so yes, they must. Is that what you meant?
Not required to do.
Yes.
I mean, in state statutes, for instance, shall is something that you can do or can't do. It's not a must. So I just want to, I mean, that's the way we've always viewed it.
Usually where you'll see that is the word may is the one that gives you the option typically. So the city may, so you've got some discretion. Shall's pretty straightforward. It's a command. You will do this. Okay. I can get into some technical arguments on cases that have been litigated where shall means may. But it doesn't apply here. And typically, a shall may mean a may in certain statutes where there's no penalty, basically, for not following the command. Okay. But yeah, here shall will mean you must do it. Excellent.
Okay.
So in conclusion to my part, basically this is an action item that can be voted on today. So your options are to recommend deny. So many of the letters that you saw, the form letters that you had in your packets, a lot of the community is asking you not to make any changes, just keep it as is. Even without changing, there are stuff in federal law and state law we still have to comply with, whether it's in our code or not. So the substantial increase, if it's considered not a substantial increase, we still have to permit those because that's in federal law. But we're trying to add this language to our code to kind of make it more visual, and that we are in compliance in case anything ever came up. The second is to recommend approval as presented with or without modifications. So that's my portion.
Tammy, Tom Hutchison.
Sure.
Is there a third option that basically says we keep talking about this and refine it further?
This will be when we get to the end of this, then we can view how we're going to take actions.
That's okay. Same thing.
Shall wait.
So at this time, are there any other questions in regards to what's presented?
Do you want questions now, or do you want questions after George talk?
We're open to either, sir.
Okay, because are there questions for Tammy?
We do have some more clarification that George is going to do. So, I mean, but if there's anything in regards to what I presented about what we have in front of you today.
I just have a comment, Mr. Chair. Greg was out here. Tammy, thank you for all the help you've done. You know, we've gone from this to this to this to this over the past few meetings, and I think staff is between this board and staff, we you know, dwindled it down, and it showed what we could do. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I'll hold my questions till after George, then they get answered there.
Mr. Chair, like Commissioner Littell, Tammy, you've done a lot of good, hard work, and it's, I think the city's better off as a result of that. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to George.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we appreciate hearing Tammy's praise. We praise her for the same reasons, and it's nice to get it from you as well. She's done an outstanding job. She spent a lot of time doing a lot of research before we put anything on paper in front of you. So nothing in what she presented to you earlier is different than what's in the actual drafts of the ordinance. The information we gave you shows underlines and strike throughs, so it's very clear what's in there. But unfortunately, despite all of that, there's been an awful lot of misinformation floating around about what this proposal does or doesn't do. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes and just clarify some of those things. And I may request time a little bit later before you take action to re-clarify the things that this does or doesn't do. Again, we have a underline and strike through version. The underlines are new language. The strike throughs are language to be removed. Is extremely clear. I think all of you have read through that. Obviously, if you had any questions about that, we will be able to answer those. I think one of the most important parts of this is there's been a lot of conversation, and a lot of the correspondence we've received has talked about where this amendment comes from. It was not something that was created by city staff to try to dodge some process. That was one accusation we've heard. It was a result of forward-thinking city council. The city council saw some of what was going on. We've talked to them numerous times in the past few years about cell requirements and the fact that the federal government requirements have changed. The FCC requirements have changed over time, and we haven't kept up necessarily in our code. And they, in fact, held a workshop in October of 2020 specifically to consider whether an amendment to the code was appropriate. And there are minutes of that meeting available, but it's absolutely clear that they were thinking further ahead towards making sure that these things are corrected in advance. There's several issues that we were asked to address. Concealment being mandatory, one of the main ones. Requirement to make sure that the compounds on the ground where most of the ground mounted equipment is stored is also treated in some fashion, that it's not just an ugly brick wall, or it's not just a wrought iron fence so you can see the generator behind it. Those things need to be addressed. And there was some discussion about what types and what locations of sites should be considered for these. The city's preference in the past has been sites that are already occupied with some internal structures like water towers, water tanks. And the reason for that is we occupy the same ground they want to occupy, high ground. You put a water tank on a hilltop, you don't put it in the bottom of the hill. And
because we occupy the hilltops of the city-owned properties, those have been preferences in the past. City-owned properties also means the city gets the lease monies, which can go into supplement the general fund and help the city provide the services that we provide. There's been a lot of information about what this does to the public notification process. It doesn't do anything to affect the public notification process. All of our legal requirements to notice the public, the distance requirements, the processes, the public hearings are all set out in section 9.9, special use permit process. That section is not being changed by this ordinance. We can't change it with this ordinance because it affects so many other uses that are subject to that special use permit process. Tammy named a few of them for you in her presentation. It's important to understand that none of the public notice process is affected by what you have in front of you today in any way. All of it's still in place. It doesn't change the requirement to have the SUP process for cell towers if they exceed the district height. Tammy mentioned all of those various districts and what their height limits are. Those height limits are in play now with the current language. If you exceed them, you require a special use permit. If you don't exceed them, you don't under the current language. This doesn't change that. The only change we've made, proposed to make in the draft you have before you, is in relation to the industrial and commercial, heavier commercial areas where we would prefer to see these towers go rather than in neighborhoods. And therefore we've offered as a suggestion to you to allow an additional height automatically in those commercial and industrial areas to incentivize them over other districts where you are strictly limited to the height or required to go through the special use permit process, which many of us have been through here, and it's often a rather arduous process for the applicant, for the neighbors, and for us. So if we can get them to go in locations that don't require that, all the better. And that's one of the key parts of this process. We don't remove or reduce the public notice. We have to advertise, we have to mail notices. State law and our code says a minimum of 300 feet from a site. We notice an average of 5 times that distance in most cases. Most cases we're out 500, 1,000, 1,500 feet because we know that it can affect people, especially with a cell tower that projects up above anything else in the area. So we go much bigger when it comes to notice circles, and we have consistently done that over the years. We don't treat single and multifamily differently. There was some concern in some of the letters presented to you that we were treating them differently. Our zoning code is a hierarchy. In the higher intensity uses like commercial, we allow all of the lower intensity uses to be in there. So we have multifamily zoning that has single family neighborhoods in it. Nothing wrong with it under the scheme that we use for our zoning. We don't want to treat them differently. What we're looking at are the actual uses and treat similar uses similarly. If it's single family, it's single family. If it's multifamily, it's still a residential use and should be treated consistently with the single family. So that is another thing that we've not changed in this case. The amendment does change the preferred location somewhat. The city has never really encouraged planting these things in some undeveloped site, pristine site in the forest or an undeveloped site in a residential area. We prefer them co-located, and I apologize for the use of that term, located on the same site as other infrastructure that's already modified the site. The water tank issue is a typical one. Water tanks are on top of hills, they're already there, they've already dug up the site. Putting another structure up there is common. Many of our water tank sites have cell structures or they have fire and police communications facilities located on the same site for that reason. We don't have anything that removes screening requirements. There have been screening requirements applied to the compounds that are almost always at the ground at the bottom of the tower for ground mounted equipment. Sometimes it's a backup generator, very often it's switching cabinets and things that are part of the telecommunications facility. tower is attached to the ground, which is attached to something else. The requirements before have often been the result of negotiations during the SUP process rather than an outright requirement, which this proposed code imposes on them. They have to screen it by this code, and they have to treat the screening in some fashion to reduce its visual impact on the neighborhood. That isn't something we required before. So you could do a whitewashed concrete block wall in the middle of an area where all of the homes are earth toned, and that would have met our requirements to screen the equipment. Screening the equipment under the old code simply meant you couldn't see the equipment because something uglier was in front of it. And that's not necessarily what we want to do. We do remove two sections of the code, which were shown as strike-throughs that you saw in the draft ordinances we gave you. Those were the purpose section of the code first. So the purpose of a code section generally is expressed in a short paragraph that basically says, here's why we have this in the code. We have it because we want to regulate the code. This purpose section was longer than that, and it had listed in the purposes criteria that's included in the ordinance elsewhere. It's included in the current code elsewhere. And it's also, in this case, with the modifications, included in the proposed language elsewhere. So we proposed to remove that purpose section because it wasn't really a purpose section. It was sort of a preview of the future criteria that's laid out in the code. There is a purpose paragraph, not titled purpose paragraph, just above that list. And if you have your drafts handy, you can look at that. So the paragraph right above purpose, that is actual purpose. The other section that we proposed to remove was the one titled performance criteria because it's not performance criteria. If you read it, and again, you have your drafts with the lines, this one goes through there, it's a list of preferences. Preferences are not mandates. Preferences say we would like to see these things. And many of those preferences have now been converted to requirements and are elsewhere in the ordinance. If you read through the list of the preferences under performance criteria, you'll see that none of them are performance criteria. None of them are. You'll also find, though, that if you keep reading through the ordinance, many of those things are addressed as mandatory requirements or very specifically called out in the language that follows in the remainder of the ordinance. Some new, some existing language. Again, there was a lot of duplication between that section and the actual body of the ordinance. We do want to allow the additional height in commercial and industrial. We believe from the staff perspective that that is an incentive that the city can easily provide. Cities typically don't want to deal with a structure in the middle of a neighborhood that adversely impacts the residents of that neighborhood. And if we can encourage them to be elsewhere, we certainly want to do that. And this code proposes to encourage them to do that. There was even some internal debate about how much additional height we should allow in order to provide that encouragement. And I think a good compromise is in the code that you have. It does require stealth treatment in all zoning districts. It is not a preference, it's not a request as in the current code. It's a requirement, it's a shall. It has to be, sorry, I had to bring that up. As in thou shalt. You have to provide some form of concealment. Now, we don't say that we want you to disguise things as trees when there are no trees in the area. We say concealment. It allows for an interpretation, a subjective review, unfortunately, has to be subjective because you can't make a mandatory requirement that covers every terrain option in town. You may have a situation where painting the tower gray makes it blend into the background. Another where making it look like a tree blends into the forested hill behind it. There needs to be flexibility on your part to recommend and on council's part to require. So the requirement is it has to be stealth. The type of stealth is determined through the process. They can offer whatever they want as an applicant. You can suggest whatever you want as a review body, and council can require whatever they want as the final approval process. We encourage co-location. We have always encouraged co-location of users on a single tower. Co-location means a second cell carrier on a single tower. One tower goes in, the user goes on it to reduce the number of towers. Allowing an additional user on that first tower stops you from having to deal with a special use permit process or a new tower in another neighborhood. So the federal government encourages it. In fact, they nearly mandate that we allow them through a process they call modification. Tammy alluded to that earlier. It's almost impossible for us to say no to a co-location or a second provider on a tower. It does not allow the same user to add additional antennas and make the tower taller. That's not a co-location. Co-location is a different cell provider on the same tower. It does retain the requirement that cell towers are allowed to go higher than the other buildings in industrial and commercial. That's different than our current code. Although we generally treat everything the same when it comes to height. If it's a Christmas tree or it's a new building, it has a maximum height limit. That maximum height limit applies regardless of what it is. This would change that somewhat and allow for additional height automatically for the towers. It does allow for additional height per the FCC's requirements. Again, the co-location requirement is an FCC requirement as well. They encourage co-locating and not putting additional towers where they don't need them. They have requirements that preempt local government. If someone comes in and wants to add a second carrier to an existing tower, they can make the tower taller. If we say no to that, they can sue us and they can win. There are FCC preemptions, federal government preemptions that we have to abide by, just like sometimes we are preempted by state law and we have to abide by those. This acknowledges it without necessarily encouraging them to do so. But again, we would have preference of lesser number of slightly taller towers than more slightly shorter towers spread out further across the city. So we talked a little bit about sections that we propose to remove about the purpose section. I just put them back up on the screen again so that you could see it. And the same with the performance criteria. If you want to talk about those specifically, we can come back to that slide and talk about those individually. Just a quick look at the difference between the two. Existing, current code, proposed code amendment, height limited in the districts stays the same except for commercial and industrial. So that's a change in the new. Special use permit needed to exceed the district height is the same, hasn't changed. Full public notice because it's under the SUP process doesn't change. Co-location encouragement doesn't change. It's the same between the two. Stealth encouragement in the current code becomes stealth requirement in the proposed new code. And then the ground mounted equipment screening requirement now becomes a requirement to screen it in the new code. So instead of a recommendation, we have a requirement. And I think with that, we would be happy to take any other questions you may have. And certainly we're available to answer any questions once you start taking public comment if you have questions about how those comments relate to the ordinance that we're doing.
Okay, George, did you have a question?
Yes, Commissioner Lee. Is there a incentive for the first locator on a tower to co-locate? In other words,
that actually opens an interesting question. If you'll indulge me a minute, I can explain how cell towers actually.
Don't tell me shall.
There's no shall in this explanation. Almost never do the cell towers belong to the provider. They belong to a cell tower company, a third party. That party owns the tower. They lease space on the tower to the cell providers. So Verizon doesn't own the tower. American Towers owns the tower. Verizon leases tower space and puts their antenna on it. There is an incentive to American Tower to allow a co-location because they can lease it to someone else for that additional height, perhaps, but to have two providers on, each of them are leasing from the tower owner. The tower owners are almost never the carriers themselves. So they have an incentive to increase the height and not build new towers. Building towers are expensive. If they can build one and put two carriers on it, they make twice as much money as if they build two and put one carrier on each. So there's an incentive built in that way. Oh, and one other thing, the applicants you see in front of you, these are paid victims. They are representatives of the tower company. So when you see a company come before you and talk about putting a cell tower in, they're not representing Verizon directly, and they're not representing a property owner. They're representing the tower owner who is negotiating with the property owner to put a tower on a site so they can negotiate with Verizon to put the antennas on it. There are 3 parties involved every time you see one in front of you. Hopefully that wasn't too much of a lecture.
Is there more than 2 users on a tower?
It can be designed to allow them. The FCC's requirement is to allow 1 additional co-location. So we have to allow 1 additional. Some of our towers in town have more than 2 providers on them. They're very large towers. They're generally located in the industrial areas or on our major city water tank sites. And in fact, sometimes the city is on those towers. We have public safety communications equipment on some of the towers. Most of our communications equipment are on independent towers because it gives us better control of them. But we do on occasion put them on towers that are used for cell service as well.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff?
Yeah, George, Tom here.
Sir.
Regarding co-location.
Yes, sir.
If a applicant wants to co-locate, do we require him having a real contract for that second carrier instead of just saying I want to go, so I want some extra height? So what I'm getting at is, how do we protect for co-location being used to get around height?
Well, co-location actually allows you to get around the maximum height. We've discussed that. The way we process it is you have to modify the tower to allow the additional height. Is a building permit process, and they have to provide us lease agreements and use agreements in order for us to allow them to pull a permit on behalf of the tower owner. So there are documents that have to be provided to us in order to show that yes, this is for an additional carrier, and that has to come from the tower owner, who is the applicant for the permit.
George, in the recent Yavapai Hills application, I recall that we had a applicant asking for more height than he really needed, but claimed he needed that height to get accurate coverage, but also claimed that he had a provision for co-location. And that didn't seem like it made sense to me. So do you have to have that second carrier in your pocket and a written contract to be able to claim that you're going to co-locate?
Under the FCC's requirements and mirrored by our code, you have to have a co-location to get the additional height, unless you ask for it because of other terrain issues and go through the SUP process. So the co-location allowance for automatic height adjustment is automatic, and it's required only if you have a co-location. We have had carriers come to us. In fact, I can think of one that had a very good argument for their taller tower, who've asked for, instead of the 35 feet allowed in this particular zoning district, they asked for 80 feet. They needed the 80 feet because there was a hill between them and the neighborhood they were trying to serve. That hill was not accessible to them, and they had an 80-foot tower that they requested. Ultimately, they didn't get their SUP for that and chose to locate elsewhere, but that is something that they can ask for. So there's nothing in here, either in the current code or in the proposed code, that would prevent an applicant from asking for a much taller tower through the SUP process and being told yes or no through the SUP process. So they don't have to show that they have a co-location arrangement to ask for the taller height. The co-location arrangement bypasses us and gets an automatic additional height per FCC regulation 6409.
With proofs that there are, in fact, two
a co-location.
So yes, they have to provide, yes, they have to provide proofs ahead of time to get the automatic extension of height per co-location.
Yeah, what I'm asking is is to build it and they will come. Well, no.
No, and we generally don't get that as the direct request. That's often something they add on later. Oh, we can also co-locate. We'd be happy to put the other carrier we're in competition with lower where he doesn't have good coverage. We're happy with that. But generally, when we see a request for additional height, it's the primary carrier's need that's driving the cell tower company to ask for that additional height, because the primary carrier is going to get the top position on the tower. Even if you have a co-location, if Verizon is the first one on the tower and AT&T comes in and wants to co-locate, the additional height, in many cases, the contractual arrangement between Verizon and the tower company would move Verizon up that amount and put the new carrier where Verizon used to be. They don't lose their prime position because of the co-location, because they were the first one in.
Another question. Are all towers, when they are initially built, structured to be able to go up higher, or when there's a request to go up higher, do they have to redo or reinforce?
I'm not sure I can 100% answer that as yes. It would make little sense to design a tower to be able to stand 80 feet, knowing that you may add 20 more feet to that tower. So the fact that the FCC regulations clearly allow the co-location and clearly prevent local government from preventing them, I can't imagine anyone intentionally designing a tower that they would have to redesign in order to add the additional height. But that's not an absolute known.
George Tom again. Doesn't that fly in the face of least intrusive?
I'm not sure.
But if you're building a new tower, so you're building it 80 feet when you only need 60, because you're looking for that.
That's a different question then. So if they request to go over the height and they don't have two carriers proposed on the tower initially, then that request has to be justified through some other means. I can't see over this. There's a building here. Your water tank interferes with me. Something has to be another reason to go for that additional height. It's not the co-location. They can use that in the process to say, oh, by the way, we can also co-locate someone. But again, if they need 80 feet to get good coverage, so does their competitor. So who's going to take the second position that gives you 60 feet on the tower if you need 80? So I think they would structurally design the tower to allow the height that they need, plus the co-location height. It doesn't make sense to design a tower that you're going to have to redesign, possibly have to reconstruct if you don't take that into consideration. So I think the answer would be they would be dumb not to design the tower to add the additional 20 feet automatically. Sir.
Butch Tracy. George, this co-location, is there ever an instance where they're side by side? Suppose one on top of another?
It's kind of rare because they often operate in different bandwidths, radio frequency bandwidths. So putting the antennas together often interferes with it. I don't think I've ever seen a side-by-side co-location. They're generally vertical if it's on a tower. We can certainly see them in many other places in the country where they're actually attached to buildings, and it's a little bit different circumstance. I don't know how many of you know that the old room store building has a cell site on the roof. That's what I thought. It's up there. It has a fake parapet, and the cell antennas are behind that parapet. So it's possible to do it that way. But the problem is those aren't the ones that attract all of the attention, and they're not the ones that have the adverse impact on neighboring property owners. It's the towers that do. So most of our focus is on that rather than those that are concealed in a building.
Thank you, George.
Other questions for staff?
Mr. Chair, I have a comment.
Ed?
I'd like to also thank the city engineer, George Worley.
Thank you. I will be asking for a raise.
I've done a good job of explaining a lot of the issues that we read in the 18 emails that we received.
Thank you. One of this is an editorial comment, sorry, from staff, an editorial comment. We take our jobs very seriously. Our job is to provide you enough information, accurate information, to make a good decision. we take that seriously. If inaccurate information is floating around, we want to clarify. We want to clarify so that you have good information. We do the same thing when it goes to the city council to make sure they have accurate and clear information. So thank you.
Are there members of the public who would like to make a comment? Please give your name, address, and subdivision, please.
My name is Eileen Wolf. My address is 818 Tom Mix Trail, Prescott, Arizona, Yavapai Hills.
Thank you.
First of all, the gentleman that just spoke right now, he mentioned about the cell tower next to the water tank, very flippantly. My husband and I bought the land next to the water tower, and the water tank does not hurt me. I will explain to you that also Steve Blair on KYCA 1490 AM, Tuesday, March 9th, said the government states the cell towers are safe. They are safe, really? Well, let me tell you, my appointment with my neurologist at Barrows in Phoenix on March 10th, she told me that a cell tower that close will give me more complex migraine incidents. Therefore, a cell tower, if it's installed close to my home, which will be 81 feet, will be very dangerous for me. She is prescribing for me now, ahead of time, emergency use medications, 3 medications. And she's going to be asking my insurance company which ones they will allow me that will be paid for by the insurance company. One of the medications will make me sleep for 12 hours straight. What happens to me when I've had complex migraine for many years, what happens, I get complete paralysis of all my limbs. A lot of my friends know what happens to me. What first happens to me is I get slurred speech, and then I get complete paralysis. My doctor is Dr. Zeman, Z-E-I-M-A-N. I saw her yesterday. When I told her about the possible decisions, what was going on here today, she was very frightened for me. And she said to me, I may not be able to have a normal life. So please, when you're looking at the situation, think about me and people like me. When I told her what was going on, she could not believe it. And she said to me, because of my condition, I may be paralyzed for long periods of time. Because of my condition, gentlemen, I was paralyzed for over a year. And I am telling you the truth. I'm kind of a person that if I get, I'm not charged for milk in Walmart. I go back to Walmart, and you can ask my husband, and I'll tell them, listen, the milk I wasn't charged for. This is my condition that I have. So what I'd like you to consider is to have a task force, because there's a lot of misinformation. And I'd like to have a task force with citizens, with experts, and yourself to look at the situation. Because there's lots of people like me. Now, I'm sorry, is my time up?
Yeah.
Okay, but I'm telling you, we need a task force. I don't want to be paralyzed for the rest of my life and taking this emergency medication, but I need a task force. This is a real situation for me. It'll be affecting me. And if it happens, even if I try to sell our house, we've been told our house will be unsellable. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public? Yes, sir.
Good morning. My name is Edward Wolf, 818 Tom Mix Trail, Prescott, Arizona, Yavapai Hills. I came here I wrote a lot of information down, and I was not aware of the entire agenda. But one of the things is, I thought we had a vote of 5-2 in favor of no cell towers in residential areas. That was one of the issues that I was here the last time. Also, how much revenue is going to go to the town of Prescott for cell towers? You know, is there some sort of an incentive for that? And my question to each and every one of you is, would you want a cell tower 50 feet from your house, your
particular residence. And I would like you to answer the question and explain why. As the population increases, more cell towers are going to be needed, creating bigger problems as we go forward. More neurological damage will occur to we the people. Property values will decrease 20%, and the folks will have to look at giant toilet brushers. That's how I describe them all the time. That's not good. We will be bombarded with 24/7, 365 with radio frequency radiation. And that's one of the problems, and property values will go down. Option one, there was a placement of a tower at Hornet and Thunderbird, but it was rejected. The question is why? Because nobody wants these things in their locations, yet they all want good cell service, you know. So there's a big problem here that needs to be resolved. So we'll need stronger coverage to protect residents from this problem. I thank you all for listening.
Thank you, sir.
Can I speak to Mr. Wolf?
Yes. Sure.
As long as it's on the agendized item.
Mr. Wolf, I want to answer your question.
Yeah.
I live in a place where I don't have cell service. I would welcome a cell tower in my backyard.
Okay.
Because I don't have cell service. I have to leave to get a cell service connection.
Right. But there's ways around that, and the cell providers are also providing all kinds of contraptions and gadgets and everything else and antennas, because we know people that have that. Also, would you be willing to deal with all of the problems associated with radiation on your head? Would you be willing to deal with all of that? That's part of my question. And I would hope that every one of you would answer.
Just a quick clarification. I think the 5-2 vote that the gentleman was referring to was on a specific cell tower as opposed to this general ordinance. There hasn't been that type of vote on this proposal.
Mr. Chairman, to further qualify what our city engineer said, I think Ed's comment was that we voted 5-2 for no cell towers in residential. The vote was 5-2 against raising it from 35 feet to 55 feet.
Tammy, do we have anybody on Zoom?
Yes, we do. So we have Sharon Garrison.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
We have three, and please give your name, address, and subdivision. We have 3 minutes.
Yes, my name is Sharon Garrison. I live at 846 Yavapai Hills Drive in the Yavapai Hills subdivision. And I'm here today to ask you to retain the existing land development code 2.4.49 wireless facilities on private property, because I believe that the proposed revisions delete almost all of our legal Prescott neighborhood protections from irresponsibly sited cell towers and residentially zoned Prescott neighborhoods. Just a few of these neighborhood protections that you mentioned earlier that would be deleted in the new proposed code are, and I quote under what you've already referred to, under purpose. These regulations are intended to provide for the development of wireless communication services to the community while protecting residential areas and land uses from potential adverse impacts of towers and antennas. That's to be eliminated. Number 2, encouraging the location of wireless facilities in non-residential areas. That's to be eliminated. And number 3, minimizing the total number of wireless communication sites throughout the community is proposed to be eliminated. These are our protections that would be deleted. I'm not opposed to cell towers, but I am opposed to irresponsibly sited cell towers. They don't belong towering over the middle of residential neighborhoods. They depreciate the property values of the residents, which incidentally has been amply documented by the county assessor letter that was previously provided to you, along with at least 5 local real estate brokers' letters. So significant property devaluation is an indisputable fact.
Thank you.
In addition, I think that right now, I might live across the street from an already compromised site, but I'm not sure because Mr. Worley has stated that a definition of such a site is unnecessary, and Ms. DeWitt previously stated that to define an already compromised site would only add confusion. However, for clarity, Webster's dictionary defines the word defining as making definite and clear. So let's make this clear. If I do indeed live across the street from an already compromised site and the current neighborhood protections are deleted from the newly proposed code, then a cell tower company only needs to make an application along with one additional carrier as co-locator, and the city council can then unilaterally justify approving their application by applying the new principle, if it's adopted and cited in 2.2, which reads stated preference for co-location on an already compromised site. So why would this be done other than for money?
Your time up, can you wrap it up?
I'm going to wrap it up. I've got a couple more sentences. Not for money for me or the other surrounding property owners, because this cell tower across the street from my house would cost me as well as all the other homeowners in the area money. The only money to be gained would go to the developer and the cell carrier company. Money gained under the guise of co-location and already compromised site is unethical when the same site has already been found to be unsuitable for such a cell tower by a previous recommendation by planning and zoning to deny the permit application. So, in conclusion, modifying the current code and eliminating citizen protections, leaving decisions solely up to the city council's discretion, is an invitation for corruption, if not only by our current city council, but also by those who follow. That's powerful. And once a right of the people is lost, it is rarely, if ever, regained. Thank you.
Okay, next we have Ann Friday. Ann, please speak your name, your address, and then we have 3 minutes.
Ann Friday, Ranch at Prescott. Good morning, commissioners, and thank you for having me back again to speak with you. First, I want to apologize to you for yelling at you in all caps in my email after the last meeting. But we as a group felt disrespected by some comments made about the general public being stubborn or intransigent. I assure you we are neither. We are concerned citizens and have legitimate issues with the proposed rewrite of the existing wireless code. Agenda pages 62 and 63, I put in Exhibit 1, which falls under the other justifications which Mr. Worley mentioned. This principle 2.2, to quote, adjust the current code, end quote, is a direction by the city council to include a stated preference for co-location in an already compromised site. Mr. Worley today acknowledges a water tank site is preferred under the proposed revision. Last meeting, there was a denial that this update is an influence, yet you can see it here with your own eyes. This new criteria has been repeatedly linked with the proposed code rewrite. Agenda page 63, Exhibit 2 is new language, and it falls under the extra weight new language to be given on co-location. Quote, the ability to co-locate additional carriers may be used as support for the granting of a special use permit at the city council's discretion. In the existing code, co-location was encouraged on existing towers, and in the new code, co-location is being used as an excuse for a new tower. It's undesirable to allow the city council to use their subjective discretion to grant special use permit requests to developers. The city council is already under extensive criticism by the general public for doing this. And then agenda page 64, exhibit 3 on modifications. Once a new co-located 55-foot cell tower is constructed on an already compromised site, It can go up to 80 feet without any review as long as it is concealed. Even Houdini can't conceal an 80-foot tower in the middle of a residential neighborhood. So here is the subtlety. Although it is still a special use permit, the neighborhood protections have been removed. The new guiding principle of a stated preference for an already compromised site, supporting a special use permit request and carrying extra co-location weight at the city's council's discretion can justify approval of a special use permit for a 55-foot cell tower in a 35-foot zone residential, where that same tower had been previously recommended for denial. Once approved, it can then go up to 80 feet and still only 50 feet from the nearest residential backyards. In conclusion, this is a terrible policy revision for Prescott residents, should not be accepted by planning and zoning. Please keep cell tower siting free from developer influence and vote to retain the current regulations, as Ms. Stotler has stated, is one of your options. Thank you. And another person here would like to speak if permitted.
Yes, why don't we reset the clock and allow the second person? Please give your name and address.
My name is Larry Springer, 3398 Bar Circle A Road, Prescott. We're in the Ranch subdivision. The proposed rewrite of the existing cell tower regulations emasculates the city's ability to control the responsible placement of cell towers. Cell tower siting must be looked at and approved on a case-by-case basis. The city must have the ability to direct cell carrier companies to do pre-planning and new developments, and if necessary, direct the carriers to go to a plan B or an alternative site. Proposals for cell tower sites are not do or die situations because there's always an alternative. That is what the engineers are for. Yet the required engineering certifications in the new proposal are being eliminated. There are instances in which one or two smaller towers in two different locations may solve the problem better than one larger tower in an irresponsible location. Changing the existing cell tower regulations takes away the city's ability to control the outcome. This control is already specified in the existing regulations and there's no need to change them. Alternative sites are required to be considered. Don't let them get away with just saying there are no suitable alternative sites. Don't give away your ability to influence the outcome by relaxing the reasonable city requirements that the current code regulations provide to you. The Assistant City Attorney, Mr. Podracki, stated in the last meeting that the city can retain local control. This is an important distinction from prohibiting cell tower service, as this is guiding responsible cell service. It's very unwise to eliminate the following purpose criteria in the current wireless facilities regulations that have all been proposed for deletion. Currently, the regulations state A, purpose. These regulations are intended to provide for the development of wireless communication services in the community, while 1, protecting residential areas and land uses from potential adverse impacts of towers and antennas. Further on, number 8, considering the public health and safety associated with wireless communication facilities, and 9, minimizing potential damage to adjacent properties from tower failure through proper engineering and careful siting of tower structures. Why would any responsible cell tower policy eliminate the public health and safety considerations from new proposals? I hope that you'll vote to retain the current regulations that offer us the public more protection than what is proposed. You are the conscience of the people. Don't become a rubber stamp with no discretion. Thank you.
Next, we have Ken Garrison.
Good morning, this is Ken Garrison.
You're having an echo.
Yes, good morning, this is
You might want to turn your device down. And you're muted right now. We'll come back to him.
Good morning, this is Ken Garrison. I live at 846 Yavapai Hills Drive, Prescott. I'm a retired airline pilot, currently working as a medevac pilot. And I do not believe you. I don't believe that you have my or any of our best interests up here in this neighborhood. If you choose to strip away my property rights by writing the code and then authorizing the construction of an incompatible cell tower directly above my home, you will create some negative impacts, such as reducing the value of my home per the county assessor, destroying the aesthetic beauty of Yavapai Hills, eroding further the public trust in our government. As all forms of communication are necessary in my business, I'm not against cell towers. However, in conclusion, if you allow the existing code to be changed so that my right to acquire, possess, control, and protect my property is eliminated and handed over to the city council, you will be violating my rights and compelling me to subsidize the tower owner in favor of their profit. As far as I'm concerned, it's all about making money, and you have no interest in the health and safety of this neighborhood. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I tried to sit down as long as I could, but there are some clarifications that you need to hear. First, this doesn't change any of the public protections that are all under the special use permit process. That allows for the review by you, a recommendation by you, and an action by city council. It is exactly the same now as it will be without this ordinance. Cell tower asking for a height exception has to prove that they have a need for the height exception, or the city council can say no to that request. If it's a co-location under the FCC's rules, they can preempt us and do it whether we want them to or not, now or with the adjustment to the code. Council can't prohibit a 6409 amendment to allow co-location. That would violate federal law and we would lose immediately. We've heard that from our attorneys multiple times. There are certain criteria where we're preempted by the bigger governments. Sometimes it's the state, often it's the federal government. Nothing about this change takes away neighborhood protections, public notice processes, or the ability for the public to influence the decision makers. Right now, under the current code, any SUP that comes in for anything, not just the cell tower, comes to you for a public review, allows a second party to the city council to review and make recommendations, and then it goes to the city council for a public hearing there as well. The council already has and will retain the discretion to say yes or no to a special use permit. Now, there may be circumstances, and we've had them, relating to cell towers where our legal department has told the council saying no to this may cause a lawsuit against you. Saying yes to this may cause a lawsuit against you. There are times when that happens. But the protections that are in place today, protections that would be in place with this amendment are the same. There's no change to the process. There's no change to the public's ability to influence the process. It's the same because it's the SUP portion of the city code, the special use permit process, that gives those protections, not the wireless section. We're not changing the SUP section. We're not changing the process. Very clearly, if you can come to this body today and object to something, very clearly, after the amendment, you can come to this body and object in the same way, carrying the same weight. None of that changes because we're not changing the portion of the code that affects the public's ability to participate. And trust me, our staff is very much into public participation. And that's why we notice that we could get away with a 300-foot notification and not notice anything else. We know better. We know that these things affect people's property values and their rights. We go out further than that to get as much public participation as possible. We wouldn't bring you an ordinance recommendation to reduce public participation. We just wouldn't do it.
Thank you, George. Chairman. George. Commissioner Lee. So, in any of these new adaptations that we are considering, do they permit what was required in the past to get a special use permit? are we permitting anything in this new proposal that prohibits or eliminates the need to get a special use permit if this plan is approved?
Yes, we are. Specifically in the commercial and industrial areas, because we are proposing the automatic height adjustment that would not require an SUP.
There are none in the residential, however.
No, we're really not affecting the residential in any way. Maximum height is 35 feet. If you go over that, you have to go through the SUP process to get an approval. And council's discretion currently exists in the SUP process. This doesn't change council's discretion to say yes or no to an SUP.
One other question, and you have to forgive me, other commissioners, because I missed the first 2 sessions on this, and that's why I'm ignorant. But the question that I'm asking is, I got my question. Sorry, it's
when you remember it, just ask me back up.
Okay. Next, we have Wendy Ratner. You can unmute yourself, Wendy. You have 3 minutes. You need to unmute yourself.
This is Rob Ratner, 701 Tom Mix Trail, Prescott, Yavapai Hills. Good morning. First, I would like to thank the Planning and Zoning Commissioners for listening to over 300 Prescott citizens when we had serious issues with a previous cell tower project proposed to go in our residential area by voting not to approve it. Regarding this recent charge to revise the current cell tower regulation, we the citizens only found out about this major revision by a resident who just happened to speak to a city official. Once again, the citizens are behind the 8 ball trying to have input into major changes that will affect our property values, aesthetics, and health and safety. I have a copy of the Prescott City organizational chart. The first thing listed, giving top priority, is the citizens. Nowhere listed are developers. Why then are the developers and their representatives given all the time needed to present their proposals to you and the city council with information that may or may not be accurate, and the citizens have to scramble each and every time to lobby to get only 3 minutes to provide information about how a particular project will greatly affect them? Prescott is not following its organizational chart and needs to do so. It is no secret that the cell tower placement in residential areas is a huge concern to citizens. Involving citizens and incorporating their suggestions and mitigating their concerns will not only strengthen future changes, but will avoid needless controversy each and every time an application is made for a cell tower. I am urging you not to change any of the original language contained in the current cell tower regulations. Also, no one discussed that having a 50-foot cell tower 50 foot from a house is unacceptable. I'm recommending that you establish a citizens advisory committee when big issues come up as this. The city of Prescott is made up of concerned and caring citizens who want the best for all. That's why we moved here. Please involve us up front and not at the tail end. Thank you for your consideration. And now we have another person.
Go ahead.
Wendy Ratner, Tom Mix Trail. Good morning, commissioners. You received a letter this week from the Yavapai Hills Board of Directors stating, please vote to protect homeowners' rights, reject proposed changes to the wireless code. Their job is to protect our property values, and our group of concerned citizens asks that you do the same by rejecting the proposed changes. On a recent radio show, Councilman Blair stated that the city attorney gave him advice, don't mess with cell towers. What we think is that the city should and needs to say to the attorney, tell the cell tower companies that if they wish to build in Prescott, don't mess with the property values of our citizens. At the tail end of last month's meeting, the city attorney said we shouldn't write laws that diminish people's property. So why is the city council having you commissioners review proposals that do exactly that or could possibly do that. Why is it okay to protect wealthy developers and landowners who wish to rent to cell tower companies and completely ignore the rights and protections of Prescott residents? You know, all of those sections, purpose and performance criteria that were flashed onto the screen, I don't see us spending anywhere near the amount of time on those protections and where they went. Because if they're still here and they're still in the process, I don't see them on any chart other than they were there for the original code and they need to remain. You know, you have shown that the code works. You recently voted to recommend denial of a cell tower application for all the right and legal reasons, and you voted to accept applications. Strangely, just as that application was to go to a city vote, the company stopped the application. And very strangely and coincidentally, our city staff started proposals that obliterated citizens' protections. That was in the first draft that we had to scramble to find out about. That new language allows your recent denial recommendation to be cast aside. That would take away your power of review and it would hurt the people of Prescott. These new proposals have unclear language with deletions and additions that vanish property owner protections. It would leave much of the decision of a cell tower building to city's discretion, and a huge loophole will be created that opens the door to mismanagement or worse. You know, right now, cell tower companies are building in Prescott. Right now, they have to obey the law. They have to go through the excellent special use process, giving people their due process. So please insist that they continue to go through a rigorous process of completeness, providing certified data by certified documents through certified professionals. The people of Prescott deserve nothing less. Yet less is what the city is now pushing to offer less protections. Just because you say we still have them doesn't mean we do. Why should we, the citizens of Prescott, be accepting or receiving and giving more to cell tower companies who use their tremendous power, you can hear it through the attorney's advice, power and wealth to get rid of the few minimal laws that protect us? Staff stated that they would not strengthen the code and that anything written would weaken the code. We know that the rewrite of the code is wrong. Please don't allow these changes. Continue the current code. As Bryn Stotler and Tammy DeWitt have stated, the city is asking you, commissioners, if we're going in the right direction, you know, we don't have to make any changes. If we all truly care about Prescott residents and property owners, the answer is clear. Reverse the city's present direction of weakening the code and keep it because it works. Thank you.
I remembered my question for George. Are there any provisions in the current or proposed code that prohibits the cell towers in residential areas?
No. We do not have provisions in the code that prohibit cell towers in any district. So they can request the cell tower be located in a particular district and must follow whatever the process, whatever the criteria is that they have to follow. If they exceed the height limit of that district, they go through the public process, the SUP. If they don't exceed it under the current code, as well as the proposed, that would be an administrative process. They would submit a building permit application to us to put a communications tower. So it normally doesn't work in residential areas because the maximum height limit of 35 feet doesn't work well for cell towers. Cell towers generally have to see over the adjacent buildings, and if the building's going to be 35 feet tall, the cell tower needs to be taller than that to see over those buildings. So we almost always have the SUP process.
And I guess what I'm hearing or what I'm understanding is these comments that we're receiving now from all these neighbors, they need to understand that the new code in no way changes the direction in the residential area. It's strictly for industrial and commercial.
Correct. As far as the heights go and the trigger for the SUP process, we are not changing anything in residential zoning districts that would let you get a cell tower without an SUP. It's different than the current way you can get a cell tower without an SUP, and that is meet the zone height. If you meet the zone height, you don't need an SUP now. If you meet the zone height after this amendment, you won't need an SUP then.
Okay, but so I'm going to be the devil's advocate. So I live in a residential area, and a cell tower provider wants to put a tower in that area. And the city or the cell tower people choose directly behind or confronting my lot. And if it's under 35 feet, what you're saying to me is that's almost automatic. Because there's no provisions.
There's no public process to it, but I think most local contractors will tell you that getting a permit from us is not automatic. Commissioner Lozelle can agree with that. There are a whole series of criteria that we take at a staff level, administrative level, to ensure compliance with the code as it's written now, or the code as it's changed if you send it in that direction, that we apply rather than you and the city council apply.
Yeah, but it's also
the same set of codes.
I understand that, but what you really have is the incentive of what it is that this body and the council understand have the initiative to protect the residents.
Exactly. It also removes, if you comply strictly with the height limitation, it removes the requirement to involve the neighbors in the process, which the SUP was intended, it was designed to do. So again, we're lucky that very few of the cell towers that are in place now ever met the district height limitations. They all exceeded it. All of them generally have gone through this process. I know of one that did not, because it was a shorter tower.
One last question. Sure. So if the process goes like we're talking about, and there is a cell tower being proposed that's under 35 feet, do you notify all the neighbors? You said it within a 300. So nobody tells the residences in that area that you're going to build, or that the cell tower people are going to build a cell tower right there?
That's how the process is currently written. If you come to the city today with a cell tower proposal that meets the district height limit, it is not a public process. It is an administrative process by staff. We're not making that worse. We're not making that better.
Well, but we're not doing anything that we're talking about to help these residents, because all of a sudden, I would think the least that we could do is to notify the residents, because you're saying that there's no residential participation or negative comments from them. Well, how are they going to make comments if they don't know you're going to build them?
It would fall under the same category as a property owner wanting to do an addition to their house. We don't notify the neighbors of that addition. It's a right of that property owner. If they exceed the rights that they have, like exceeding the height limit, now it becomes a public process. It's not a right of the property owner to exceed the zoning allowances. This doesn't change the zoning allowances because they're primarily associated with height and setbacks, which are clearly laid out in the code. The proposed amendment clearly says what those setback requirements are, clearly says what the maximum height limitation is. So we're not making it better from a public participation standpoint, but we're not making it worse either. It is the same criteria that triggers the requirement for the public process, and that's exceeding the zoning height.
I understand that. I guess what I'm saying is I feel that there ought to be something more that we as the city could do to inform the neighbors or the neighborhood that there is a proposed cell tower at that location. And then you might get some public participation when they come in for that. And that's because you're saying is that if the neighbors don't have a conversation or bring negative comments to this board, it just goes through. It's a rubber stamp.
Again, if a proposal comes in that meets the code, it won't come to you. It just comes to us. So one of the things that we found in zoning generally across the country, at least in the United States, has found is that if you put a public notice process in place, and don't actually give the public any influence over the decision, it will cause more frustration than simply having something that's permitted by right move forward. So, for instance, someone wants to build an addition on the back of their house. We notice all the neighbors that they want to build an addition on the back of their house. Some of the neighbors have objection to that because we don't have any process that allows discretion. It's allowed by code, by right. Those neighbors are then encouraged to express themselves, and we can't take their comments and actually influence the outcome of the process. It causes a great deal more frustration when the public if we allow them to comment on something that we can't take their comments into consideration on, than if we allow them to comment and encourage them to comment on something where we do take their comments into consideration, again, as in an SUP process. So think about it. If you want to build a swimming pool and I notice your neighbors and they say we don't want a swimming pool, and I say too bad, what was the point of noticing them in the first place?
I think there's a drastic difference between an addition to somebody's home and the cell tower that's going to affect 10 to 15 or 20 homes.
Unfortunately, George, this is, it's not within the purview of what we can do here. Whether
can't take rights.
It's not something that the Planning and Zoning Commission can say, you got to do this.
It is something you could encourage to change in the code if you want us to send such notices out. But again, we would be inviting comment that we can't use in the decision making. Because if you have the right to do it under the zoning, you have the right to do it. And if we take those rights away or modify those rights, then we're going to be subject to other conditions and other circumstances that Matt would be happy to give you an hour-long ride.
But also we cannot require something that's unreasonable. So if we don't require, if we say that this is allowed by right and you're allowed to do this in our code, we cannot impose other regulations on it that we would not do to any other type uses, because that would be considered unreasonable. And then we would, if something happened and they couldn't build it, then we would lose a lawsuit.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, Brent Stotler, Director of Community Development. I just wanted to tail off of George's comments in relation to Commissioner Lee's concern. We have an inventory of the existing towers in our community. There's only one tower that's 35 feet or less. All of the rest of them are in the 60 to 80 foot range or 55 to 80 foot range. The likelihood that towers are coming in at a 35 foot height is very minimal. The existing code does not allow for a public process for the 35 foot height because that is the district allowance. I just wanted to comment on the likelihood that we would receive tower applications at 35 feet is very small, because what we're dealing with right now in the community are these areas that have decreased coverage, and the reason is topography. In almost every case, a 35 foot tower is not going to have the effect that is needed to resolve service issues. So I just wanted to make that statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Brent.
I'll hop in here. I don't think I need to, but zoning exists to set certain standards and certain uses, and certain zoning categories. So everyone knows what the rules are. So when you have a height limitation in a certain zone, everyone knows it's 35 feet. And I think, and George makes a good point, to encourage people to come in and let them know there's a 35 foot flagpole as opposed to a cell tower coming into somebody's residence, that they have an absolute right to put under the zoning. You're just going to encourage people to come, cause all sorts of consternation on something the city would have no authority to change.
And right now, under state law, we can put reasonable criteria against wireless facilities. And then, like I said, there's legislation coming through the state's legislation that will requires to allow small cell sites on residential property. So we're trying to kind of get ahead of that one too, as we're seeing this come through. And the only thing that we could regulate for zoning in regards to those is height and whether it's concealed. So this criteria that we're proposing would allow for a greater height under the commercial and industrial, but keep the same under the residential, hopefully we're trying to incentivize them to go into those other areas. So it's not impactful. So that's why we're trying to, right now, if they came in and under a commercial, they have to meet the height or go through the SUP. We're trying to say, hey, we'll allow you this extra 20 feet there to allow you to go into this commercial area rather than go up into an industrial area, and hope will this meet your meet your gap requirements. So, but right now there are no height requirements for it to go in a right of way. So in a residential area, if they want to go in a right of way, then there is no height requirements. There is nothing else required for that. So we're just trying to keep some, and all we can regulate under our land development code is private property.
Any more questions for staff?
I was going to just kind of pop in here a little bit too. Is suddenly you start getting to the dance with the Telecommunications Act, which has, you know, certainly local jurisdictions retain the right to, the words are, regulate the placement, construction, and modification of personal wireless facilities. But then it goes into the 5 thou shalt not. So here we are back in church. It was kind of prescient that the first applicant was the Calvary Church, because we're now going through the commandments of things you shall not do. One of them is you shall not prohibit or have the effect of prohibiting the provision of personal wireless services. And that's where it becomes sort of problematic in trying to attempt to kind of restrict cell towers in any particular zone, because the federal government is going to prevail here. Their rules, their regulations say that you have to have the ability to provide people wireless services. And Prescott has such a strange topography and existing infrastructure that it may almost be impossible not to allow a cell tower with an SUP, which need the additional height in residential neighborhoods, carte blanche. I think there would be a lawsuit, and I don't think the city could prevail.
Okay.
We have
Again, any other questions? We have any board else on Zoom?
We still have more people on Zoom.
Okay.
Okay. So Jeanette Levy, unmute yourself.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, good morning, everybody. And I'm trying to wake us all up a little. So thank you very much for having me. I live at 3613 Bar Circle A Road in Yavapai Hills. And, you know, I thought it was kind of fun earlier when you guys were trying to define the word shall. So let me define another word for you, and that word is excise. And I want to use it in the medical sense. So when a medical doctor excises something, what he does is to completely cut out with either a scalpel or a razor, a tumor or a cancer. And so I know there's been discussion that maybe we people really don't understand things and it's hard for us to grasp things and all of that. You know, actually, I personally, with a higher degree from an Ivy League institution, I have a master's degree from Columbia University. I personally don't have a lot of trouble understanding most things that I read. And I've scrutinized the changes to the existing Land Development Code 2.4.49. And what I see as I read it and reread it is that what it basically does is surgically excise all the protections for the public health and safety of the citizens in this new ordinance. And I've got to ask myself, why? Why? How does that make any sense? Now, I did listen to very, very carefully to Mr. Worley's very lengthy bullet points of how there is nothing bad or wrong or adverse in removing all these protections. And yet, it's very, very clear to me, and it became particularly apparent as soon as he said 2 words, water, tank, or 3 words, water, tank, site, because then it became all crystal clear. Not like a debate over the word shall, but crystal clear that what all of these bullet points in this little Excel thing were truly all about was one thing: pulling the wool over our eyes, telling our uninformed citizenship, or people who are so unable to understand what's put before us, that actually there's one goal and one goal only. And that goal is a backdoor way to let Jason Giese build the cell tower on Bar Circle A Road in Yavapai Hills. Now that was shot down. And now what we do instead is take the regulations and butcher out everything that gives protections to the citizens, because these poor stupid citizens won't understand. And we'll give a presentation with bullet points saying, it's okay, it's all right, there is no problem. You don't understand, we'll explain it, you're good, it's good, we're all good. Okay, and you know what? The time allotted for all of you to speak on Zoom, we're just gonna go in circles saying the same thing over and over and over, as boringly and as uninterestingly and as repetitively as possible. Let me just say one quick other thing in conclusion, which is nobody's really mentioned the physical hazards. Now, if you folks take a look at the photos that Ms. DeWitt provided to you, which were taken from the January 2021 snow, ice, and windstorm, you'll see that large shards of ice in the form of dagger-like icicles will fall, and large chunks of razor-edged ice have been blown to the ground. Now imagine that in your backyard, which is only 50 feet from an 80-foot cell tower laden with ice and snow, you risk being hit with this when you're outside and out in your yard. The fall zone of a 50-foot tower is a 30-foot radius, and the fall zone of an 80-foot tower is 46 feet. However, things don't fall straight down in a windstorm. They become unpredictably dangerous. They become projectiles that are hurled through the air and onto your property. Now, wouldn't you worry about your children and your pets playing near this monolith? And why do residential property owners in Prescott even have to argue this point? Why is it not self-evident? Now, if you look at pages 105 to 107, you'll see that the confirmed wind damaged APS utility pole line less than 2 miles from where the snow and ice photos were taken. 10 of the APS poles were snapped and splintered in the November 2020 windstorm in this area, which shows that this altitude, these are not one-off events. So I think you need to take a look at not only your procedures, but the physical hazards. Thank you for your time. And I have right here my husband, Rory Levy, who also is patiently waiting to speak.
Before we on more comments there, if the matter you want to talk about has already been presented to the council, restating that is not advantageous. We have, the commission has heard what the parties have said. So to restate something that has already been stated,
they've restated it.
What do you think about that?
Can I speak? This is Rory Levy. This is Rory Levy. I'm at 3613 Bar Circle A Road, Prescott. And I disagree with the statement that it's not advantageous. I think everything my wife Jeanette Levy said that you should all take and really absorb. We are a very smart group of people, and we don't, I don't think statements from the P&Z Commission making us seem less than that is really respectful, frankly. So this is a situation. The City Council is now asking you, the Planning and Zoning Commissioners, to change the existing wireless regulations to give them more authority, more discretion in where they can decide to site a wireless facility. You could use your new criteria. You invented a principle called 2.2 co-location on an already compromised site. In the case of Yavapai Hills, where I live, it's the water tank right by the Jason Gissy site, 4044 Bar Circle A Road, and that will give weight to your decision. The only definition that we've been given for already compromised site is a developed site. How did a developed site take priority over vacant land, which allows for pre-planning a wireless facility before the vacant land is developed? This is backwards. Vacant land can be better designed for a wireless facility on it than an already developed or compromised site can be, especially if the developed site is in the middle of a residential neighborhood. So what will be the impact of the new regulations for the residential neighborhoods? The city says they won't change for residential because a special use permit will still be required for any height increase. But the process of the SUP will be changed because the City Council will have given more discretion to use this new principle to put a wireless facility where it may have already been deemed unsuitable. For example, consider if an SUP might be pending under the current regulations for a specific location, but not yet voted on by the City Council. Again, going back to 4044 Bar Circle A Road, the commission voted 5-2 against that tower. and then it was put on hold for some months now. And now we have the ordinance consideration of revising the regulations of the Land Development Code. So that location can be withdrawn. If the new regulations are approved, which will take effect in 30 days, then a new SUP for the same location can be submitted by a new agent acting for 2 cell carriers who are co-locating and start the process over. With the new criteria to be considered, co-location on an already developed site to be given more weight at the city council's discretion. A previously submitted application recommended for denial can then be justified by city council approved and then constructed in the middle of a neighborhood and only 50 feet from the nearest residential properties, damaging property values. One that 55 feet co-located tower is constructed, a modification to it of the new regulations will allow the tower up to 80 feet in height by right. No one can stop this 80-foot tower. It will still only be 50 feet per residential, 50 feet higher than anything around it for a mile in all directions. I ask you to keep the existing regulations that protect our neighbors from such an abuse of power as the city council is asking for you to give them. And I've asked my neighbor, Eileen Wolf, who is there, to hand out the visual aid that I prepared to accompany my talk, 10 steps to approve a cell tower. And I would have wished that the respect would have been given to the citizens to have an uninterrupted public forum, and your public discussion could have followed ours. I don't appreciate that. Thank you for your time.
Tammy, do we have anybody else?
Yes, we have Heidi Miller.
So repeat that again.
Heidi Miller.
Heidi Miller.
Hello, am I heard? I think so. Okay, I just was, my name is Heidi Miller and I live in Tucson, Arizona. And I just wanted to observe that the bullet points here are to encourage co-location. However, state and federal law states that co-location is obligatory. And co-location is defined as having, I'm sorry?
Heidi, you're cutting out.
Oh. Well, I don't suppose I know how to fix that.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Just continue.
Right, and I'll just continue. Like I said, it's co-location is obligated, and co-location is defined as having, if there is a structure in the area, then that's where it needs any antenna needs to go. And if they can't put their equipment on that tower, then unfortunately they're not going to be able to put their equipment up because they need to bring one equipment that can fit existing structures. The other thing is that it is also obligated to utilize the minimum power necessary to carry out the desired communication, which is functionally equivalent services, which is defined as wireless voice calling. And that's not including broadband. So the minimum power that's necessary is extremely low to get 5 bars on a cell phone. It's something like -85 dBm. So I believe that should be observed if you're going to make any changes to your ordinance and not simply giving yourselves full power to no longer discuss these things with the public. The intent of these laws and any ordinance is always to promote public safety. So at all times that should be observed and the #1 priority. So that's all I had to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next we have Paul McGavin. Please give your name and address. We have 3 minutes.
Hi, I'm Paul McGavin, and I spoke to George at detail about a very simple solution to this problem that he completely ignored in all of this code in front of you today. In many ways, today we're watching your address. I'm sorry?
Your address, please, for the record.
Yes, my name is Paul McGavin, 62 Harrison Avenue, Sausalito, California. And today we're watching a slow car crash, which would be a disastrous outcome. We're watching the blind leading the blind. You're focusing on the wrong power. It's not the power of one stakeholder over another. It's the power, the maximum effective radiated power that comes out of these wireless telecommunications facilities. Your Prescott residents have done their homework. They have done much better today than have your city staff. Please listen to your intelligent, motivated Prescott residents. They figured this scam out. Don't pass this ordinance change based on a presentation today. You personally must read and reread the proposed code to find the subtle excisions of protections. First of all, the word must is always better than shall. Choose must every time. Don't excise protections, put more in. Yes, the town has to allow wireless companies to provide wireless service, but what kind of wireless service? Telecommunications service. That means wireless phone calls and texts. Important rulings in the DC Circuit Court of Appeals in August of 2019 and October of 2019 have made that very, very clear, that the FCC no longer regulates information services. That is internet video streaming and gaming. There is no preemption for such services, only telecommunications services. That is why minus 85 dBm is the correct measure of what is sufficient. That is 5 bars on a telephone. If you would just measure your own community, and you can do so and charge it back to the wires company, you can see exactly where you may have insufficient service. Any place that has between minus 125 dBm and minus 85 dBm is fine. No tower needed. In order to have sufficient protections in local muni code to regulate wireless telecommunications facilities of any size or any G, one has to regulate all 3 parameters as a set: vertical, horizontal, and power. You are focusing only on one parameter.
30 seconds.
You are myopically focused on that one and missing the main point. The new generation of densified 4G, 5G WTFs are simply too low to the ground, too close to where people live, and output way too much power for how close and low these antennas are allowed to be. Make every single one subject to an SUP, and now finally regulate the maximum output power to that which gets the job done and no higher. That's a real solution, discussed with George, but ignored. Thank you.
Okay. Next, we have Jeff Nolan. We also make the note that Greg was left.
This is Jeff Nolan, 782 Tom Mix Trail, Yavapai Hills. I'm asking you to vote no and to refer this matter to a citizens committee, or it's put to a vote to the public. Why can't this proposal address a minimum setback from residential properties that is beyond just a fall zone? It needs to consider that there's total market participant rejection of cell towers, that the owners that have knowingly bought a home near a water tower, it's significantly different than adding another negative to the problem. There should be better planning for vacant land that's being developed to site these towers in those locations, but existing residential areas needs to have a better setback, 300 feet, 500 feet. I'm a former deputy assessor in Maricopa County, also a 30+ year property tax consultant. I make a living out of identifying negative influences that impact property values. And it's clearly obvious that if you had 2 homes similar, one has a 50-foot tower 50 feet from their property versus a home that has nothing but great views, that home is negatively impacted if the tower is there. And it should be considered, and I don't know why everything is geared toward we're just changing the commercial and industrial, when the real problem here is the towers being placed next to residential homes. If you put it to the vote of the people, the homeowners, how close would you allow a tower to your house? 50 feet, 100 feet, 300 feet? Not near my home. That's where you'll find the answer. And a citizens committee of Prescott homeowners will give you better feedback than taking the lobbyists and the attorneys for the cell towers presenting what they deem they need and have, and that's the only place they can put it. That's all I have. Thank you.
Patrick? Patrick? Hold on a second. Patrick? No, you don't have audio. Okay, so we'll get to go to Russ. Russ, you can't mute yourself. You
yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, my name is Russell Whitty. I'm in Tucson, Arizona, 1438 North Camino Villa Bonita. I'm a professor at the local university. You can probably guess which one. But I've worked with microwave radiation for 20 years in medical and defense research. I developed cutting edge imaging modalities that use microwaves, ultrasound, light, and other techniques. And I really fully support measures to limit effective radiating power that comes out of the small cells in particular, because we know from 20,000, actually more, peer-reviewed publications and government studies going back since 1927, that even low-level microwave radiation within the range of 4G and 5G is a hazard to all forms of life, including microbes, accelerate their replication, insects, plants, animals, and humans, since the first radar towers went up in the 1930s. And one of the things that we actually do in my lab is create images from the sounds that's generated from pulsed microwaves. And that's called the microwave auditory effect. That was first published in 1961, and there's a whole book on the topic. And so I really would like the Prescott City Council to consider a task force, including health board officials, to open up the books to these publications, 20,000. The vast majority of the independently published research, I would say on the order of 3/4 to 4/5, clearly demonstrate that there are all kinds of effects and mechanisms that go long beyond heat. And I think just to be on the safe side, even if you don't want to believe the peer-reviewed literature, please cap the power to minimum necessary. That's 47 US Code 324. It's very clear. It was in the original 1934 Telecommunications Act, and it was there to protect public safety. And they're very simple measures that you can ensure minimum power that comes out of these towers to ensure just 5 bars on a cell phone. That's telecommunications, texting, and voice communication. So I'm happy to provide any more advice. You can reach out to me anytime to more information on what I just said. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that's it.
No more?
No more.
I want to take time to thank the public, both in person and on Zoom, for presenting their thoughts to the commission. We appreciate that. Does staff have anything else they want to make a comment on?
No, sir.
All righty. Do I hear a
Mr.
motion?
Chair, I'd like to make a few comments before we vote and make a motion.
Okay.
Since this is televised and it's on videotape, I'd like to share with our audience outside of Zoom and outside of in person that this proposal before us is to update a proposal that hasn't been updated since 2003. And it represents or pertains to cell towers in industrial commercial zoned areas of all of Prescott. We have heard, I read 18 emails, and we've heard from 16 calls, all of which were residents of Yavapai Hills or their representatives, one from the ranch, two from Tucson, and one from California. We are not here to relitigate SUP 20-001, the cell phone tower proposal on Yavapai Hill. This is to discuss the cell phone tower proposal for industrial and commercial. Now, I think for the benefit of the public, we've touched on some of these. Our attorney touched on the first one that I'd like to address, and that is government regulations. And in those 5, you shall, the one that he touched on, I want to reiterate, and that is, you cannot prohibit or have the effect of prohibiting personal wireless service. I think we've also discussed the fact that we have a terrain issue. We got mountains, we got hills, cell coverage is line of sight. And it's a challenge here in Prescott that you may not experience in Prescott Valley or Chino Valley. There's also a capacity issue. When cell towers were first erected, I think I had my first bag phone or brick phone in Michigan, which is so flat you think you can see the Rocky Mountains from Lansing, Michigan. All we did with a cell phone was talk. But today, we have smartphones. And on smartphones, we're streaming sporting events and we're streaming movies. We have a greater degree of need for capacity than we did when it was just a cell phone. Also, Prescott and Prescott Valley and the rest of this area has grown. Prescott since 2000, Prescott's grown 30%. Prescott Valley has grown 97%. So for us to do what's right for the city and what's for the residents of the city, we have to evaluate the proposal that's in front of us. And I would encourage our public in future meetings of the Planning Commission to voice your opinion so that we have a representation of the entire city and not just one subdivision within the city. Thank you.
Is there a motion?
I'd like to make a few comments if possible.
Okay, Tom.
Now I'm not getting double feedback. Couple things. Regulations are failed designs. Let me say that again. Regulations in all form usually are, almost all the time, are failed designs. We create regulations because we didn't do the job right. Okay? So we're trying to do the job right. The gentleman from California pointed it out to us, that we have a very unique situation here. Different sites require different technical solutions. Okay? Where I live, I don't know what that solution looks like. Maybe a cow, a carrier on wheels, I don't know. But the point is that setting specific guidelines somehow doesn't allow encouraging siting in those very adverse locations. It encourages industrial and business. That's good. It encourages fewer cell towers by co-location. But co-location, as I said earlier, should not take precedence over height or power or whatever. So at the end of the day, what I'm hearing today is that I heard a lot of things, but first and foremost is on a more specific note, how do we protect the outcome of our planning and zoning opinion from the Yavapai Hills section? I think that's a concern that's alive in this room today. How do we protect the 5-2 vote that we had back in November? from this proposed ordinance?
It doesn't change anything. It would still have to go through the same process. It has to go through the same process. It doesn't change anything.
So the applicant gets a second bite of the apple?
No, there's still an active application. And we're not charged, that's not on the agenda. So we can't talk about a specific application. If that application has not been withdrawn, it's still active and still has to go through city council.
Okay. Just pointing out that's a very, very real issue today in this room. Some thoughts. I'd like to see some language for unprofitable, difficult solutions, something that encourages providing people that are in locations that it's very difficult to get self-service, something that encourages carriers to set up self-service. I'd like the ability to challenge the technical case with a third party if necessary. We're relying on our expertise and the council's expertise to ascertain whether a professional engineer is telling us the truth or not. Well, that may not be our skill set, probably isn't. We need the ability, if we don't feel that we're getting accurate information on gap coverage, on power usage, or any other attribute, we have the ability to somehow, at the applicant's expense, either through a increased permit fee or whatever, to go to a third party and basically ask a very detailed and specific question that we're not clear about.
Mr. Chairman, point of clarification. That's not part of the proposal today.
We have to keep.
I'm making comments. Okay.
Tom, would you rather make a motion on this versus, because as Ted said.
Before we make a motion, Don, I'm trying to clarify that in fact we're not ready for a motion.
Then that's your motion.
Okay.
You just made your motion.
Let me finish my comments. Thank you. When I read over the proposal, when I get to paragraph G on modifications, and this is for clarification, there's an incomplete sentence that basically says, give me a minute here.
I know I have it up. I can show you what you're talking about. Basically, improvements to existing telecommunications facilities or support structures that result in substantial increase to existing structure. And I completed that. So let me show you. So here, and I was going to point this out, and I forgot to add that to my presentation, was we'll be required to go through the special use permit process for approval. So this clarifies that if it's considered a substantial increase that exceeds the allowances allowed by the FCC, then it has to go through the special use permit process for approval. So I fixed that one.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I apologize. I was going to mention that during my presentation. And
Chairman, I've spoken my piece. Thank you very much.
Okay. So is there a motion concerning the item in front of us?
Mr. Chair, Stan Galagowski, I do have just one comment, and just after listening to all the public commentary, reading everything that was sent to us, when I reread this ordinance and what we're looking at in front of us, there was one particular sentence here that stood out to me, and it was caused a crack, and it just continued to expand. And that was what was discussed in our very last meeting. And I think 4 of us have said on paragraph A under purpose number 2, encouraging the location of wireless facilities in non-residential areas. So I really looked down that whole purpose, every single one of those sub lines. And I know that we've had this put up on the screen as well about what was removed. to me, I can see where a lot of the consternation really comes from. And it comes from just reading this one purpose paragraph. And if we were to omit this, I think we're really doing a disservice to what this ordinance really originally set out to do. Everything else that that's in here, I can point to another location or another point or within this ordinance that's, you know, it's actually a better document. But if we're going to be transparent, if the city council is going to be transparent, and when you write a document, if you lay out exactly what the document is intended to do, there's nothing wrong with maintaining the purpose. We're saying we really do want to encourage non-residential cell tower or cell towers in non-residential areas. We said that we wanted to have it in a special use permit. We don't want that to exceed the height requirements. Let's protect the document, at least keep the purpose. And that's what, you know, among us as a panel here, I think we should just keep the purpose. It doesn't harm anything. There's nothing in the Wireless Act and in this ordinance that flies in the face of anybody that's presenting a cell phone tower, but it does protect the residents, and they can point to each one of these subparagraphs, and each one of us can point to those subparagraphs when we're looking at it to consider for a special use permit. That's my comment.
Do you want to make a motion with that change in there to leave purpose in there with that one item?
Mr. Chair, point of order. Could we ask staff? I think our city engineer addressed that earlier. Could you address it again?
Please do it. 1 and 9, because it references stuff that we don't have in, you know, the wireless communication plan.
Other than number 9 in the list, referencing something that doesn't exist and hasn't for years. There is no wireless communication plan for Central White County as far as any of us can find. It may have existed at one time. The purpose section was proposed to be removed because it's overly long and duplicative of other sections of the code. You're absolutely right. It doesn't hurt the regulatory parts of the code to leave it in there. We just proposed to remove it to clarify that we didn't have duplication. And we don't have the potential for having language in this section that may read slightly differently than the regulatory language further down. Staff certainly doesn't have an objection to putting this back in with the elimination of number 9, which references something that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and honestly, I see it as that it really helps the staff. I've learned a long time ago, if you're explaining several times, you're losing the fight. So if you have this up front, and we can say throughout this document, this is the purpose of the document. We're really trying to protect you. So let's protect the staff when people come up, and let's protect the residents, for them to have, something to at least point to. Minus the wireless communication plan for
unless someone out there has one, but the county can't find it either.
I had a copy of it. I don't know where it went to. So one long time ago.
Mr. Chair, do we have a proposed recommendation slide?
Yes. Yes. So, well, it was either recommend denial on the proposed changes, which is what you heard mostly from the comment, or to recommend approval as presented or with modifications. So, as
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion.
Okay.
I recommend approval of the this is tough on me to read that small print.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can make it bigger. It's behind me too.
But I have to turn away from the microphone and the public wouldn't hear me.
No way.
I recommend approval with the modification to reinstate the purpose excluding item number 9.
We have a motion. Is there a second to this motion?
Do we want to omit all of number 9 or just the wireless communication plan for it? I think everything else is relevant. If that's what is that right, George?
Sure. Yeah, yes, we can just delete that part of the wireless.
Yes, I agree with that modification.
Okay.
Would you restate the motion again? Go ahead. Just make sure everybody's aware.
I recommend approval as presented with the modification to reinstate the purpose, excluding the portion of number 9 referring to Yavapai County. That do it?
We have a motion. Is there a second to this motion?
I'd like to second it. Stan Galagowski.
Motion has been made and seconded. Any other discussion? If not, Kaylee, would you go ahead and call the roll for the vote, please?
Butch Tracy.
I agree. Yes.
George Lee.
Yes.
Thomas Hutchison.
Yes.
Stan Galagowski.
Yes.
Ted Gambogi.
Yes.
Don Michaelman.
Yes.
The motion passes 6-0.
I'd like to point out, this is just a recommendation that will be forwarded on to the city council. And so this discussion will be held again from city council there. I see they're very enthused about doing this. So can't wait. Do we have any staff updates?
You guys are free for the rest of the month. We don't have any items for your next agenda item, and we'll let you know for next month.
We did a 2 for today. Okay. Then we will adjourn the commission meeting at right before noon. So we did it early.
At 12 o'clock.